head of the administration of the president, responsible for reforms, Dmytro Shymkiv, and he will update us about reforms in our country and also about the meeting of National Council on Reforms and which took place yesterday. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to focus on the second meeting of the National Council on Reforms we had yesterday, and we had President, Prime Minister, Speaker of the Parliament, Secretary on Defense and Security, Head of the National Bank, and Ministers, heads of factions and of committees who were invited related to issues that we covered. It's very important because the first time we had heads of parliamentary factions and coalitions. That idea was supported by the last meeting of the National Council on Reforms, and yesterday it was done. It's important issues that we discussed and decisions we made. First of all, there was a report on execution of association on between association agreement between Ukraine and EU, and the report on implementation of the agreement will be discussed during every meeting for us to see the progress and to be able to control all stakeholders, participants of the process, to understand where we are as to implementation of the association agreement. And also on the agenda we had judicial reform, anti-corruption reform, reform of law enforcement bodies. Unfortunately, some issues covered in the statement of the President and Prime Minister. We didn't discuss them because we had no time, and the second meeting will be during the next 2 weeks. We'll discuss issues we did not have time to discuss this time. How to reform the system of state enterprises measure, and also presentation of initiative of digital Ukraine. We spoke about that, and that's about correspondence, e-request of citizens. But I will speak about that when I speak about the meeting of the National Council. First of all, when I speak about the association agreement on January 2021, there was 8 resolutions of on 42 acts of EU. According to the resolution directive of the Cabinet of Ministers 847R, it is planned to approve about 180 acts, and the President underlined that at the next meeting of the National Council on Reforms, ministers and committees must unite, and they should approve all 180 plans or acts, not 46. It's important that some aspects of reforms in the framework of association agreement, Ministry of Energy and together with the Energy Society developed on the 27th and brought to the government the draft law of Ukraine on the market of natural gas market. The main goal is to create a competitive environment, and also taking into consideration the requirements of European Community and as to the third EU energy package. It's important that on the 19th of February there will be a visit of the head of the Euro Commission. It's important. There's no confirmation, but there is such information. So it's quite possible that we will hold a joint meeting, or we'll work on the status on implementation of reforms, and in particular the association agreement, because that's a key document which penetrates the coalition agreement program of the government, and it's a key for the strategy 2020. Then there was a reform of law enforcement bodies. So we discussed it with the minister and the first deputy minister, Kazuladze. They informed us about patrol police, and we discussed the situation with in police initiatives. In February, they will bring two draft laws to the parliament about patrol police and about in interior forces, and the key is has a pilot as to patrol police, and by the end of the year, that such police will be introduced in ideally in one or two cities. Or 3-4 cities with 1 million residents. That depends on donor assistance or finance, and maybe there will be a need to use such an assistance by the end of the year. MREO will be liquidated. Judicial reform. There was an interesting discussion at the meeting. We invited two points, two opinions, two groups. As we remember, on the 13th of January, in the first reading, they voted for the law on the right for fair court from the president and deputies group that is headed by Oksana Zeroid. She was at the meeting. She was invited to discuss the judicial reform. Very important conclusions. I'll not discuss all conversations, but discussion was very constructive, and we underlined. Oksana Zeroid told that at the base, they will take the draft law of the president, and now there are more than 1,000 amendments to it, or suggestions to it, or comments, and a decision was taken by the next statute, and all proposals should be prepared to include into that draft law after the first reading, and there must be a group. The president underlined that the importance and that we don't have a lot of time for the reform of judiciary, because that's the most expected reform, and will begin a very important element of judicial reform, because that is about the judges. Also, we discussed issues of immunity, and I can tell you more about that later. Then we discussed the issue of anti-corruption or corruption fight. The Minister of Justice told us about key milestones of anti-corruption policy that was passed in the Parliament last fall on February 10, the last day of applications to receive applications for the director of National Anti-Corruption Bureau. All the meetings of the commission to elect the committee are online, broadcasted online, and then we expect that according to the law, by February 13, we expected that there will be the president will receive a suggestion, and he will bring the candidate to the parliament as to the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Also, there will be amendments introduced to the Criminal Code of Ukraine as to creation of the Investigation Bureau. This is the reform on General Prosecutor's Office, depriving them of general oversight, and that is basically saying goodbye to the Soviet past that happened last year. But that is a big achievement which many lawyers understand, especially in Western countries, who understand what's the difference. Also, this week we're planning, there will be hearing in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on the report of the General Prosecutor, and we discussed that issue. Also, I would like to mention what were in the focus of attention of the President, to speed up the rate of implementation of judicial reform that was mentioned in the report, in the presentation, and during the discussions. Also passed at the Parliament the draft law, the amendments to the constitution on depriving the MPs of the immunity. And this week also they have to approve the necessary amendments to anti-corruption legislation, which will take into account the comments of the Commission, which is electing the head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. It is important that every month the decree, the status of implementation of the association agreement is discussed, and today we had the meeting with the representatives of European Community, and we will start to structure these reports so that we see what we achieved in the past, what we achieving now, and what are the gaps. Also, the decision was made on speeding up the regulation. I believe that there were 173 initiatives presented in the document, which was disseminated to participants of the meeting. Also, the issues that were discussed at the last meeting and now is becoming more and more topical. The working group has been set up, and the process was launched on creating the model of transitional provisions on payment of salary to civil servants. You know that we have submitted the draft law on civil service to the Cabinet of Ministers for final approval. According to that, we are transferring to the principles of functioning of civil service like it is in European Community in Poland. That is the document which was analyzed by Sigma, and NGOs were working on that. We have positive opinion on that, but the issue of paying to civil servants is one of the issues, outstanding issues, because according to the law, we need to move to the proper salaries, but we have the situation with the financial crisis, and we need to look at how this process can be taking place, what markets, what covenants, what conditions should be in place to significantly increase the salaries, and we need to develop the models for developing the proper principles. We talked to different organizations which were implementing similar projects in other countries of the world, where they had to increase salaries for civil servants. Also, another task, by the end of the year, the Constitutional Commission on considering the amendments to the Constitution on decentralization and local elections should be considered, and also by May we need to resolve this issue with visa-free regime. That should be done before the Riga summit. Also, the single social contribution was introduced, and there's readiness to consider alternative points of view related to tax reform, because any reform and the changes are a living organism. Also, the Prime Minister stated that we introduce control over the activities of large companies that's fighting against offshore schemes, and also 5% of GDP is allocated for defense, and that is one of the ways of reforming the military-industrial sector. It is very important, and that is related to European integration. In every ministry there is a deputy minister on Euro integration, but the Prime Minister mentioned that it is important to create the Vice Prime Minister on Euro integration. This position and the thesis of Prime Minister is we need to replace the civil servants in all the bodies of territorial authorities. I would like to repeat it because we have mass media here. The Prime Minister addressed the TV channels about launching of regular programs where the profile ministers, heads of the sectoral committees would discuss reforms. This shouldn't be the show with ratings, with measurements. This should be the TV program where people start understanding what every reform means, what changes it means, what could be alternative scenarios of the reform. It should be educational but not entertainment program, so that average citizens understand the essence of reforms. And what the Prime Minister emphasized, one of the main tasks is signing of the new program of financing from IMF, and I would like to emphasize we see very good progress of the Minister of Finance, the dynamic of the discussion. That's one of the best ministers of finance of Ukraine. The Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, I emphasized that the plan of renewal of the country 2015 that was given to the Cabinet of Ministers, our European partners say that it should become the plan of legislative work for the Parliament of Ukraine because it provides for 3 years. It mentions the indicators of the strategy 2020 and requirements of coalition agreement. It provides for the elements which are reflected in tactical action plan of the government. Talking about what hasn't been discussed, that's the project Digital Ukraine, which envisages some draft laws directed to digitizing the life of Ukrainians. Unfortunately, we do not have any legal possibility to address electronically, and there are 2 draft laws submitted by the President to the Parliament. The first one is to provide the citizens the possibility to address authorities by electronic letters without any signatures, without any of these technical limitations, using the approaches that all over the world are used. During the Revolution of Dignity, we were using the portal of the White House to form the petitions, and we see how easily this could be done. We use the experience of Britain, of Great Britain, US, and Germany in that, and we included that into our draft law on electronic appeals and also the or electronic petitions, and we start the project when the electronic petitions will be created on the website of the President of Ukraine. The second draft law on digital Ukraine is about open data, which are to be published, made public, and these are the data on public authorities, like the data on the state budget, the budgets of territorial authorities, the list of the certain registers, but the publication should be not in the format which does not allow you to read. There should be a digital format, just like it is done in most countries of the world, when you can get data in electronic format, and analysts can work with that. It shouldn't be the scanned document in the format of PDF or other format. This should be digital data with which analysts could work. That's important because there's a global approach like that, and then we can introduce the project of open budget, which is promoted by the World Bank. You can look at the website of the World Bank how information about budgets of some countries is provided. This allows to compare, to analyze, and allows to be transparent. I have several more new pieces of news now. We are testing the electronic procurements. We started the process of testing in Energatom, Ministry of Defense, and other agencies. There are comments, there are mistakes. They are correcting these mistakes. And that's important because one of the elements of the package of digital country is the issue of digital signature. We welcome the position of the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, which informed us that they switched to a new version of the draft law. They understand that the new draft law on electronic digital signature should take into account also the Euro integration and development of international standards. That is important, and we hope we'll be cooperating with the Ministry of Justice in that. And we believe that the legislation in this will also be developed so that we have digital country. The digital signature shouldn't be the mandatory element, but the element which is used in the world at the same principles. In most cases, electronic document is just an electronic document. It shouldn't have a digital signature. But during so many years, we had in our country the laws which restrict the development and Ukrainian developers in creating the innovative solutions which lead to use of electronic resources, because the digital signature was considered to be panacea from everything. But you can look at the most of the world resources, you will not see it anywhere, with the exception of when the documents are fixed of legal nature. Everything else doesn't require any digital signatures in the world.
I updated you on the main issues. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Very good report. Questions to our speaker, please. I have a question about the reform of public service. Several times we discussed it here. So the discussion is going on for several months, and it seems like everybody was supposed to express himself. We have a draft law in the Cabinet of Ministers, and 2 weeks have passed. Why such a delay? It's not clear. And also in the package there was about finding those sources, and the idea you spoke about a secondment, and also what has happened to that idea. What's the alternative? So what I mean, a lot of time has passed, and that could be discussed a long time ago. And in the package, those 2 laws could be provided to the Parliament. But as I understand it, there's the draft law on public service, and but there's you discuss only models. So it's not clear to me. Could you be more concrete about the status of that process? The draft law was discussed, developed on the basis of national public service. Was developed, and with the participation of international experts, and that law must be approved in the Cabinet of Ministers. So that will be a correct approach before it comes to the Parliament. It's important, and during our meeting we discussed it, and that law is mentioned in the coalition agreement and in the program of the government, that it must be passed in the first quarter. It exists in all the documents, and there is a reference to it. So we need to speed up the work in committees and agencies as to that draft law. Second element, important to pass the law. It's wonderful. It was so supported in the previous during the previous meeting, but there is one but, and we don't want this law to have the same, to be the one in the law that was passed in 2011, when it was considered to get into force in 4 years. We don't want that to happen. It's because the salary salary will influence on the pension fund. We have serious problems, and we should improve the situation. Also, when we give a raise, we make the pension fund bigger, and state budget it doesn't include that raise because that will be a burden for the budget. So we need to develop an approach how we will change to new how will we move to new salaries. For example, where GDP grows or revenues grow, which allows to consider in a quarter a raise by certain percent the salary of public servants. And that transitional plan must be approved as a transitional, but in the part which is about how to finance the salary of public servants. All the rest of the aspects of that law must be put into force right away, because they speak about criteria and the political roles and not political roles and the separation. Also, there's a big part which is correct and should be approved, but the aspect of financing this, somehow during the last 6 months it was not discussed, and so the task we are facing, yes, we need to develop an approach, and we should suggest a model which will be acceptable for the Ministry of Finances and also for foreign donors. Could you be more concrete? Does it mean that these two draft laws will not come as a package? Is it correct? The draft law will be approved, and then the financial part will be approved in the first quarter. Though on the state public service, and there is the issue of transitional paragraphs. We need to explain the structure, financial structure of that issue, as to the fund or temporary service. The draft law received comments from European community. Nevertheless, we believe that this instrument should be in our hands, and as one of the instruments, it would be correct. Public servants should be paid from one source, and that is the state budget. That will be correct. At the same time, we should understand that there are state enterprises that must make money, must make profit, and their salary should meet their profitability, and there should be that's the major focus. And also any limitation does not make sense, and that is an aspect of reforms. That there are also limitations that cover education, medical, healthcare, etc. So all of these issues, this are part of a difficult mechanism. What kind of a raise we can give, under which conditions? Could we give a raise? So we need to develop an approach. Other questions? Dmytro, thank you very much. See you next Tuesday with your updates. Our working day is over.